Mine says it's streaming now.
Hey, Josie. You hear
Hi
us?
there.
How you doing?
Good.
Hey, you still in Hawaii?
I am. Yeah. Yeah, it's not bad.
Is it hot there?
No, it's actually quite temperate. We're up a little bit in elevation, so it's just really nice all the time.
I'm trying to get OB online here. I'm not sure if that's him speaking. That's sure.
No, it's actually quite temperate. We're
Also, you have
a little
to
bit in elevation,
go back to
so
the,
it's really nice all the time.
yeah, the internet, and then you just have to where the YouTube is, so maybe go into the orange.
That one?
Yep, and then you have to exit.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, so nice to meet you in person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What was your name again?
Elisa.
Steve.
Steve
Yeah.
Griffin, that's
I know. Hey,
impressive.
nice
What
to
is
meet
this?
you.
This is so
So
wonderful.
Yeah,
A family reunion.
Yeah.
Oh, you're my mother's third cousin. I'm the one
Right.
removed.
Hi, I'm Laura.
Laura.
Nice to meet
Steve.
you. Steve.
Hey, Steve, how you
Yeah,
doing?
good.
Good to meet you.
Likewise.
I don't think we've met.
No, we haven't.
In-person meetings are making it all real.
We're trying to get
Assuming
OB
there's
on.
Wi-Fi
Rick, are you
here.
hearing us?
There is. Actually,
Do either of you know the password?
Mr. York?
yes.
are
You don't need a
uh,
password.
Oh, GC, yes. Okay.
Yeah, GC gas, and then you select the first of the two bubbles,
Not
and
getting
it'll
you.
let you connect
We're not
without a
getting
password.
you. You're unmuted.
It has tripped me up more than once.
OB, can you hear us yet? We're past it. Trying to do technology here, Emily. You're the boss, so.
Gee. This is already better than it's been. Okay. Do we confirm Rick can hear us? Is it just OB?
No, Rick, Rick, are you there? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I thought from the agenda, we'd switch back to Zoom, or I would have been down there, so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, Rick.
Sorry, I
No, you're
gotta
okay.
clear my volume.
OB, you can hear us, but if he speaks, he doesn't show up. Is that the issue? Shoot.
Where is he? He's there, but let's see. Oh, there he is.
Do you want to try leaving and signing back
He
in?
just did.
Oh, my goodness. Can you call in on your phone?
Maybe you have to go to Hawaii.
I concur, OB. I think it's time for a long trip. That's the
Let's
best
all
thing
go
to
to
do when
Hawaii.
Zoom won't connect is we go on vacation.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's hear. OB, on the bottom left side of the screen where you see the microphone, if you click that arrow to the right of it, yeah, it should let you call in. And it'll keep your face on the screen, but it'll connect your audio by phone, and that might be the best way to see if we can bypass this.
I don't know why he's used this system before. I mean, I realize it's hybrid, but I don't know why it wouldn't work.
I don't know why it wouldn't work either. That's very strange. Well, let's see here. Josie, Rick, OB, Garish is on his way, and I believe Makeda is missing. So we are at a quorum, though we are split between remote and in person.
Bob, all right.
We're not gonna be taking any, we're not gonna be actually making any motions.
No, we'll talk about that.
But I assume we're going to be staying here in this format for our meeting this evening.
Obi, I just heard
Hear
you.
me?
Yeah, Obi.
It's fixed.
Oh, there you
There we
go.
go.
It looks like I have it. Good.
Okay.
I actually went to my options somewhere and found it. I would have been down there too. I'm like Rick when I saw the thing that said something on the agenda like remote meeting only or something.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, I would have been down there. But that's great. This will work.
Okay, yeah, well, we'd like to meet you in person at some point. too.
It'll happen.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I know we want to get started. Just one second on quorum. There's we had a policy around whether a quorum was considered an official quorum if
Oh, right.
people were split between their, I don't know what that means for our later meeting, but we might want to just ask Chris and Mallory. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so we're ready to go.
Okay.
One of the things I should just characterize, if I could, before you start officially, we did notice this meeting, but we didn't notice it through the state. So it's not officially noticed. Therefore, you can't take any action. There's no action in the workshop. There's a recommendation, but you don't take action on it. But the preliminary plat, what we're hoping that you will do is have an emergency meeting this week or whatever, special meeting. Wednesday would be the best day with a quorum if we could. That way we can advance the preliminary plat to the commission by next Tuesday.
Okay, let's make sure that we'll save that until the end of the workshop, but we can make sure that that timing works for everybody. And I don't see why we couldn't move forward with that. Perfect. It is 2:09 to 10, flipping the clock over. And so we'll call our workshop to order. The intent of this workshop is to provide feedback and direction to the planning staff, as well as related to the general plan steering committee and ongoing work. We have a loose agenda, but largely we plan to use this in workshop conversation and sort of open format. So I believe that sort of captures the objectives and the goals today. And John, I'll let you sort of kick us off as far as how you think, I mean, we talked about structuring this into 3 segments. So maybe we just want to start there, but I'll let you provide some context if you'd like.
Okay, well, hopefully everyone can hear us. There are some links that we sent. Hopefully everybody got the agenda. I could put this, I'm not sure if you want to, Emily, Chair, to show this or not, or maybe at some stage we can. There'll be some links we might want to open, depends how deep we want to get into examples or models out there. I have quoted a couple of them, one from Flagstaff. Flagstaff, Arizona, not that we want to use it as the ultimate, has a strategic plan that the commission has adopted. It has a community strategic plan, and then it has a very well-developed integrated general plan with all the elements in it. And then it has a forms-based code, which is a hybrid forms-based code, which is pretty much high-end land use code. Some people may be familiar with that. So it has all of those moving pieces, which is great. It took them a long time to get there. Sedona was the other model that we used, which is somewhat similar to us, maybe a little bit more intensive planning that goes on, but not a bad model to look at. They don't have a strategic plan from the commission, but they have a community strategic plan. And then they have a fairly well-developed general plan and the land use code. So not a bad example. The other one I used was from my past, which was from the city of Revelstoke. An example of a resort community, only it's the flip of us. The winter's their busy time and the summer's their quieter time. So they expand quite a bit because of the snow season. A world-class ski resort, 25,000 bed units is built out, as big as Whistler Blackcomb. So that's master plan. If you're a skier, it's a great place to go. Let me know and I'll get you tickets. So anyway, we did a really hard work there getting the general plan adopted, much like what we're doing here. We did a top-down review and had it in place, and then we redrafted each section as we went ahead. So it's got a pretty strong land use section and what we call an integrated community sustainability plan, which covers the social, environmental, and economic, which has all been integrated into the plan, and a fairly good model zoning bylaw, we call it their land use code. Anyway, that was the other reference. Many people probably have other references that they could use. Emily, you might have some in your background as well. Steve, I'm not sure if you've got some that you want to refer to, but I mean, it's always good to have those. And just to let you know, the county commission is looking at doing a strategic planning workshop next Tuesday before their meeting, much like the same format as we're having here. Mainly focused on where do you want, I mean, the ultimate question, what do you want the Moab area, Grant County to look like in 20 years? So that helps to frame the general plan in a lot of ways, and potentially take a look at a public engagement exercise sometime in September, and maybe using the format of a charrette, and public engagement would be a key part of that. So I thought I'd start off with the public side of things and the strategic planning side of things first. I'm not sure if everyone knows everyone. I don't know if everyone knows Laura.
Yeah, hello. Hi.
Laura's here. And I think some of you might have met her, maybe not, at least virtually anyway. And she knows everyone here now. Okay. Laura.
Yes.
And Elisa, she's what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
Third week, on the third week.
Third week?
Yeah.
So she's a Utahn, as they call them here,
Right.
originally. Has been in California. We'll forgive her for that though. And and now has joined us too. And we have another planner starting in a couple of weeks, Jenna, who we'll introduce later, of course. And then Mary's joined us too. Everyone knows, I think everyone knows Mary.
I'm
So I
only
don't know.
temporary. Temporary.
Temporary Mary. So Laura is going to be working with us on a part-time basis as a public engagement strategist. And we're going to put a public engagement strategy together, which will then run by the Planning Commission, hopefully in the second workshop in August, I should say, before the charrette. The other thing that we'd hope to put on that agenda is more things that were left off of this agenda. We were hoping to get to land use code, and there's too much work here. So that was left till later. Elisa's kind of working through a list. Any comments you have on the land use code that you want to make, and we're getting some of those, let us know. Elisa's gathering that. Now, we may do a couple of amendments. As you know, we did the one last time. That's going to the commission hopefully next Tuesday. We will make some tweaks in some areas that may are hot topics. So we want to look at those too. So as a commission or as commission members, depends how you want to do this, Emily. I don't know if you want to do that in a more formal fashion or just have commission members comment on any land use code hot topic areas before we have a workshop on it.
I think it's worth just doing it ad hoc. And then if there are issues that anyone would like to bring to the table, submit them to me and John ahead of our meeting, and then we can make sure that we have a discussion item. So generally speaking, any commissioner can get something proposed for the agenda. So, but I don't think that should stall out participation and sending suggestions your way.
Yeah. So Elisa, you've seen Elisa's email. I think she's emailed everyone here, so you've got that contact.
So John, the general breakout that we had discussed, first of all, I do think it would be useful to share the agenda as a screen share. We should be able to still see the faces of our peers. There we go. Okay, just to sort of keep the, let everybody sort of know how we're sitting at this and keeping ourselves accountable. The three areas that we discussed covering were what do we currently have and not have, and what should be our priorities, which can be anything, including things that we haven't discussed in the past. How we want the public engagement component handled for the general plan update, but I don't know if that's something with decision making, if we need to postpone any decisions there, but certainly we can discuss it. And then just general commenting on studies, anything that we felt needed to be more formalized, adopted as a resolution. And so those were the big three that I know we had specifically called out wanting to account for.
Very good. Yeah. And most of that's not changed that much. We've added a couple more exercises here, but the public engagement strategy is an exercise here. And going through the draft table of contents just to see, I mean, this isn't the final swing at it. It's just one of those comment areas, of course, that we want your feedback on. And I know the commission has had a work plan, somewhat of a work plan in January that you've identified. We tried to capture that as best we could in the exercises here. Let us know if we've missed anything. I'm sure you will. Don't be bashful. So the outcome, we're taking a look at, first of all, a holistic general plan. We're taking all the pieces.
Just scroll down just so that they can see the. There we go. Thank you.
We're taking a look at all the pieces that would go together in a general plan to have them work together. And in some cases, as we start going through the table of contents, you'll see that there may be areas that we don't even have information on. And in those cases, we would do as much background as we could in writing it, get as much data as we can, and then move forward with policies that actually start to form those sections. There'll be a gap there, obviously, so you can't completely make it comprehensive, but at least you can start to identify where those gaps are. So that's part of the exercise. The first part of this exercise is actually take a look at at the table of contents. And I was going to break us into two groups. I'm not sure if that's workable, the way the hybrid system works. We don't really have, but we could probably just do this amongst ourselves. It might take a little bit. Let's try it just as a group here and see if it goes, if it doesn't work well. So the first place is to take a look at some of the action items, the timetable. Let me start with that before we go to the table of contents. Emily kind of stimulated this discussion at our steering committee meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, and put down some action and references that you'll see here. So July the 14th, RFP review in land sector. So let me just give you a bit of an overview of that. Between now and September, we're hoping that we will draft a public engagement strategy working directly with the Planning Commission on how that section of the OCP, or the general plan, I'll say OCP because it's Canadian, as that section of the general plan works. And we'll want your feedback on that. That'll be a big, important part of that. We're doing all of that internally though. We're not hiring a consultant other than Laura, of course, and paying her the big bucks. So she's going to help work that's internally. I think it's always better, and the commission can comment on this, to do the public engagement part internally and not give it to a consultant. Hopefully that transportation part will unfold that way too. So we should be on the pointy end. Staff and administration should be on the pointy end and facilitate discussions with both the commission and the public. We're not leading the discussions, we're facilitating those. So it's putting that framework together, putting some strategies together. Part of that involves a number of exercises. When I say exercises, references, contact list, stakeholders, engagement strategy, how that will work. I think somebody raised the web-based application. I think it might have been Emily last time. Making sure we're using all the media tools that we can. Maybe even a software program called Bang the Table, something like that, that actually allows for that if you've seen those work before. And not so much just a Facebook page, but something bigger than that. And it allows for ongoing public engagement. That takes time to put together to some degree, and it takes time to maintain them. So that's the goal, is to actually do that internally, utilizing what Laura's done so far. She's been a sponge that you can just feel her kind of taking things in as she's working through things. So that's helpful. The other one that we're looking at, and this is a consultant, is to take a look at, and let me stop there, Emily. What do you think, what does the commission think of that approach to public engagement? I know it's a big topic, but.
In terms of it being facilitated in-house, I think that's great. A lot more buy-in. So I think that's it. There's buy-in.
Yeah, we'll have a framework for you to look at. But we've been interviewing, I don't know how many we've gone through so far, Laura.
7 or 8. maybe.
7 or 8, yeah. We've got probably 2 more weeks of interviews, maybe more, 3 weeks of interviews yet.
Yeah, we still have quite a few.
Yeah. And they keep expanding to some degree. So
What's your gauge on how those are going?
I would say right now they've been pretty helpful, and in some ways I think it's motivating the other departments too to kind of beef up their own master plan, because we've had a lot of like the departments come in and they'll say, yeah, we have this master plan, but it's a few years old, so this is kind of a good time for us to also, you know, work on modifying it as well. Yeah, updating it. So
That's a good point.
for them it's probably beneficial, but I think for us too, we're getting a lot of really good information, like from the airport and economic development.
we did a site visit to the airport with Andy and met with, I forget her name, Tammy.
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 Yeah, that was a really good meeting.
Yeah.
So just in general, I think we're getting a much broader scope, which has been really helpful. So
It's a great way to learn, you know, get a quick, you don't know everything, of course, I'm saying that, but you get a good understanding of what the lay of the land is and what it feels like. So
So I know that I think doing it in-house is fabulous. We've worked with consultants in the past, and there's a mixed bag of reaction, I guess, to the veracity of what the consultants find. Michael Scarda's doing. I do think 2 things. The first is the more simple clarity we can make public about the process, the better. There's a lot nested in this process, and it can make people feel very overwhelmed, or even potentially make people feel distrustful or unable to participate, unsure how to participate. I realize now we're talking general public and not direct outreach to interviews, but you know, it's a bit of a black box even to people who are involved in the process, and even more so to people who aren't, especially for those who remember the process back in 2010, which that decade went by in a blink of an eye.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oof. So that's one. The second thing I think that was raised in our last meeting and remains a very good piece of general feedback is making sure that our the broad diversity of the community is reflected in our interviews, and ideally in our interviewers as well, because we want people to feel as though their voice matters, that they can speak candidly, and you know, making this a process that's inclusive across many dimensions is a very important step to getting to that holistic community view.
You know, Emily, speaking to that, I found, you know, the last general plan, what did they do? And now I'm going to lose the name of the building, the Grand Center. And there might have been 200 people there with, of all things, those little clickers that you click to vote on things.
Yeah.
But I think those things for the general public feel like they're having a voice in the process. And I think the interviews are great because you need to know some key things from some key groups in the county. But in terms of people feeling that they actually have a voice, some of those maps you walk around to and suggestions you have for potential changes and stuff is very, very helpful to get some buy-in.
Oh, that's great.
I went through a general plan update for a small town in southwest Utah. And what we did in a charrette was we printed out huge maps, and we had a few different scenarios that we put together through GIS, and like kind of showed what the build out would look like with the current zoning, what the build out would look like in different scenarios. So there were like 3 different scenarios, and people were able to kind of give their input on those. So I don't know if that's something that we want to think about. And the other thing is maybe doing some kind of online outreach where we could garner some input, maybe through like some survey questions.
Well, that was the thing, feeding off the Spanish Valley one, is taking that and you building off of that more generically and without losing the flavor of that too.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't seen the Spanish Valley one, I don't think.
No, I would like to look at that.
That's good stuff. The other thing that we did was a visualization exercise, and you actually take pictures of various kinds of settings, more of an urban thing, and the kinds of things you like and you don't like. So it's a red dot, yellow dot, green dot exercise.
Yeah.
And you count the dots up and take a look at them later.
Density, like we can kind of show different variations on density.
You show the sprawl locations, which some people tend to like, you know, which in planning terms is not always the greatest, but.
Right.
So yeah, that reference point is really important. So the visual, like you're getting at, Elisa, is really important. Is have, and Bob mentioned, is to get the maps up, graphics up, and have people look at that. The other thing we did was a 3D visualization exercise. We actually started visualizing downtown cores, and streetscapes, and building orientation, those kinds of things too, within our realm, not something somewhere else.
Right.
May I make a suggestion of a specific type of data that we haven't captured in the past and I think is very critical? There is a tendency to think in absolutes and not in trade-offs. And yet I think right now we're at a period of time where we do need to find those more balanced futures in between different extremes. So I know that we've heard voiced even to this body, very pro-development, very anti-development. That's one example. But what are the trade-offs within that? Am I willing to sacrifice higher density in my neighborhood in exchange for more competition for teachers and other employees in the community? Am I willing to, do I want to see economic development, but only if it's equitably shared across generational lines, income lines, and industries, or am I only wanting to see a specific type? Because those are the sorts of things that really get us to action, whereas a lot of the input that we've had in the past tends to be, like I said, very absolute or not always necessarily considering the pragmatism of development.
For sure.
And so however that's worked in, I think it's critical.
Yeah.
And we need to be talking about
Give
trade-offs.
and take, like,
Mhm.
if you want this beautiful thing that you want, then there's gonna be something else that's gonna maybe have to be
Yeah.
considered, so.
Or else the general plan, there will be a large part of the community who doesn't feel like it represents them.
Right.
And so the more that we can find those intersectional goals from the community through our feedback sessions, the easier it is for us to suggest action based on.
You've touched on a couple of hot topics there, obviously. Even
I'm all over the
trade-off.
place, sorry. Just a few controversial issues in our
Yeah,
community. at the
there
moment.
are lots of them. The housing is definitely one of them, service sector, the economy, diversity in the economy, what that means to people.
Mhm.
And keeping, I don't know if they want to keep the kids here, or they want them to go away, but I get having kids here that actually are able to stay here and work here and live here.
Suggest community health, I would argue. That's for later.
So that actually introduces a topic on strategic planning. That's a good example of the kinds of things in a SWOT exercise you go through, because you don't just look at the strengths, you look at the weaknesses, but opportunities and threats, which actually this kind of that second component is kind of capitalizing on what you're getting at. At least that exercise should do that. So it's not like you want to be pro-development in 20 years. You want to see 25,000, 30,000 people. What does that build out look like? Some places want to go there. Or they want to see a 24/7 city downtown. That's where Tempe, Arizona is going with the university there. So it's thinking more of a Vegas style 24/7 down in the downtown core. Those kinds of visions are not easy to achieve. And if that's really something you want to capture, I say we, it's the corporate we, of course. Anyway, those kinds of things are great. So any other trade-off ideas that anyone else might have?
I just wanted to speak to that a little bit, piggybacking off of Emily, because I think it was in the Flagstaff strategic plan that just talked about the inevitability of change. And I think a lot of times, especially in Moab, we can hit this stalemate of like pro-development versus anti-development or pro-growth versus anti-growth. And I think it would be great to just frame the process in terms of the inevitability of change, so that maybe we're not focused on the inevitability of growth, but it's the inevitability of change. And so then we can lean into what future development or future change looks like, as opposed to just put on the brakes or reverse it or go backwards. And that might be able to engage people a lot more in proactive visioning instead of just saying, shut it down. So I like that kind of leaning into things are going to change. How do we want them to take shape as they change?
Very good. Yeah, property rights comes into that, of course, in a big way. So, and how that's managed constitutionally. Of course.
And I think, just to continue piggybacking, really getting ahead of things with public engagement on the front end. I think we have to make it crystal clear, really, to highlight those points that Josie just made and Emily was referring to. This concept of changes that is inevitable, and we're not seeking to grow this to a megalopolis. But and then going back to what are those trade-offs? Well, if we say no to everything and we put in place all of these restrictions and policy and regulations, that people find a way, corporations come in, and now it's no longer our community. And so we have to look realistically at there's going to be some growth. Which direction do we want it to go in?
Yeah, and I have one comment on a specific trade-off, which could be sort of development versus open space or trails or that things of that nature. Because as I was looking at both Flagstaff and Sedona, I think there is this increasing desire for walkability, for access to human-powered recreation and activity. And I was really trying to think, okay, how do we shape future growth so that those things are built in, and so that that's an incentive for future growth to make sure that those things are amply built in, and maybe that's a consensus that people can come to in future vision.
Yeah, I think the other important one that is urban versus rural development, and where infrastructure is, there's somewhat of a technical exercise there too. That's that level of service analysis, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that to me is one of those things that where smart growth really, when you look at it, really deals with growth management and how it's being managed. You don't normally put urban levels of development in rural areas that don't have infrastructure. But you also focus on the areas of service, industrial and commercial, which we have a lack of. So we know that data. I think we know that data. It's taking the data that we know and working with it. Some of it we guess at, of course, which is sometimes when you don't have it, you have to guess at things. So I think what I'd like to do is kind of jump in. This is a good segue into the land use question. The RFP review land use and sector plans is kind of second, in my view, on the agenda as far as the scope of work is concerned. And just to frame this before we get into the actual table of contents, and that's to think in terms of what does land use mean and what does it look like, and how do you translate that from a long-range vision to development regulations, and how do they relate to each other? I don't know if it sounds like Josie looked at the Flagstaff one. I think they do a pretty good job of linking urban and rural, because their actual general plan is a regional general plan. It covers both Coconino County and Flagstaff. So we don't have that. So that's one of those questions, because if our scope is big enough, it really should bring in our partners. I mean, I don't force them, but bring them in. So it would include San Juan County in a big strategic, that's the dreaming part. Because this is not something that's easy to realize, I know that. It's the ultimate in planning, regional planning. So the city, San Juan County, and us really are partners, jurisdictional partners.
How do you factor in
And parks.
parks? I was gonna say, how do you factor in like SITLA, BLM?
There you go. All of those as well. Those are all jurisdictional partners. And the land use one needs to address that. It's so fundamental to how growth occurs and how decisions are made. Will we have all the answers in the general plan? Not likely, but we'll touch on them. That's the place to touch on them. You don't touch on them in the land use code because that's the regulation. You can't make changes there easily.
Yeah, I think when you just mentioned SITLA, that for me, that I keep thinking should be really integrated. SITLA's future plans and the county, because there are opportunities to kind of collaborate on infrastructure or whatever they might have going on with trades. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I could see some opportunities for sure collaborating with SITLA in terms of development.
Yeah, we're meeting with them on Wednesday and they seem really excited to
This is
talk
Brian.
to us. Brian and a woman named Elise.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that'll be a pretty informative and constructive discussion with them. Yeah.
And by the way, cities on our list. I don't think San Juan County is yet.
Yeah.
Are they?
Were we
There was
reaching out to them
I
though?
think
We should be reaching.
Yeah, we should. Yeah.
Thought we were just
Haven't yet.
or something.
Well, because didn't you invite someone to be on the steering committee from San Juan?
Mac would be Mac McDonald likely, I'm guessing. You know, they have a planner. I don't even know if they have a planner. Do they?
I don't know who it is, but they have.
Yeah, so that's the partner. We tried to involve the parks as well, so we have some context.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I do think we should move on to the next item. But I'll just put a quick pause, more at the 30,000 foot level, that I am candidly, immediately overwhelmed by the complexity of our current moment in time. And I realize that's not an excuse not to act. It's probably the thing that's delayed action most of all, but I'll just speak to sort of where my head is at. I'd like to know from these interviews as quickly as we can, our belief as a community of what we think is the driving force that everything falls out underneath. Because right now there are a number of things that are in conflict, and I do think it's important to own sort of which we feel is going to have the most important force that we can work with it. So forgive me for a little bit, but I like systems Monday afternoon thinking, but economic diversity is one that comes up over and over again. Economic diversity may come with costs in the short term that create discomfort, but long-term value. And those costs in the short term could go up against other high priorities, such as concerns about ecological security and sustainability, about a sense of community and quality of life for those who live here, as well as the ability for those who work here to opt into ownership if they choose in the community. Those are the big three in my head. Obviously, that's not all encompassing. We also have aging population. We have,
housing underneath all of that. The reason I say that is because, you know, let's say of the three of those, we said, you know what, as a community, we really feel like quality of life for residents is the number one thing. That could have major implications on how we define economic diversity. And if we're trying to hold those two as equal, we could end up with a very fluffy plan that does nothing. And so this is me being a little controversial and sort of forcing this a bit, but I would be curious to know which driver people see as the thing that's repeated to them from the public and the opportunities they see and in parallel to other communities, because we are going to have to make some tough decisions or else we're going to continue to do nothing as a community. And that's a choice too. So sorry, not to opine, but.
And Emily, I might piggyback on that. I've been sitting here thinking of Steve's comment about, well, we're going to have growth. And I agree with him. And there's a piece of me that thinks, of course, about water, because I always think about water. And it's an interesting question as I try to think. So let's say you were going to have 10% growth in the next 5 years or till the next general plan. What would you like to see? It's an interesting kind of question because you could do the 10% growth in more hotels, which may not even be sustainable for the hotels given how many are online, or would you see it in affordable housing, or would you see it with some more economically diverse businesses? It's a really interesting question if you don't think growth is kind of unlimited. And I wonder how much of that can get worked into general plan, what you'd like to see. And then of course, the even tougher thing, can you then develop ordinances that get you what you want to see? Very complex problem, very high level.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
think.
not, go ahead, Joseph.
Oh, I was going to reference back to the Sedona model of information gathering, because that does seem to be what they did, and kind of along the lines of creating different maps that show different future use scenarios. They showed kind of a tourism-driven scenario, a community-driven scenario, and an environment-driven scenario, and those were very clear sort of possible future focuses. And then based on that, they had that kind of Venn diagram of the three according to importance that the community gave feedback on. And at least in Sedona, the environment was the big one. So that was sort of the big circle that everything else was in. And then the other two were sort of proportionate to their importance. And I think it would be really great for us going into this process to maybe do something similar as an overarching template for what is the most important thing that everything else falls into. And it could be those three, or it could be something very similar.
The section in the Flagstaff, the slide deck that was attached, and this might get to your SMART goals and putting that against principles, but that's where I think, Josie, what you're describing and what I see here really rung a bell for me, which is it's going to be very difficult for us to speak to specific outcomes because of those trade-offs and because of the intersectionality. But what are the principles by which we believe we should make decisions as a community against what, and how do we measure the efficacy of those principles and those decisions? That to me seemed like the clearest path to what we can use as a community. And I just was getting, I'm candid, was very overwhelmed by everything else, of just sort of like everything feeds into that. And I'm not sure, even if you polled this body, what the principles are as a community, we would all have the same ideas of the ones we're even operating on today, let alone where we think they need to evolve to. So
That's the nature of growth management, though. It's not growth stimulation, and it's not complete preservation. It's a balance between the two. Which is always where the tension exists. And in property, there are constitutional obligations you have within the current planning regime and regulatory regime. You can't take development rights away that are already established. We know that legally. In a democracy, you can in communism, but you can't do that here. So, and because we're not going to change to communism, So that's one of the tension, that is one of
Yeah.
the goals of smart growth, is not that necessarily, that's why smart and growth are put together. It's not to just grow, and dumb grow, it's to grow smartly. And if you're going to grow smartly, it means preservation. So I think the scenarios that Sedona has looked at and Flagstaff have looked at are somewhat sophisticated as far as planning tools are concerned. That's exactly where the land use strategy would go. It would actually start taking a look at scenarios of infrastructure, a level of service analysis. Where is the current sewer, water? Water's a big one. Sewer's a big one too. Sewer's a growth service. In Washington State, you don't grow urban levels of development without sewer. That's state law. So, and stormwater management is a big one there because of salmon. We have somewhat stormwater management impacts on our river, although you might say they're all impaired. I don't know. But that's a big issue too. So the infrastructure, where are the roads, where's the network, where's the infrastructure? And then you start layering over top of that with the environmental one, where the land use objectives are. And then the types of growth scenarios. And that's the goal, is to make that as visual as possible. And that's, to me, where the backbone of the general plan is. We don't have that. And we need that in a regional way too. But a general plan can start working on those things and maybe not get there. We might not get there in October. I don't know if we will. But at least we should be going down that road.
I believe we need some formally adopted water management plan as a community. And within that, I would expect to see some assessment of water cost of different types of developments and what we would expect to offset those costs when it came to any future proposals. I would expect to see some sort of baseline index that we could use to determine how fast we grow and in what areas based off of that, whether that's inclusive of, the recharge capacity of our aquifers or conversion of agriculture to other uses and so on.
Demand side too. It's not
Demand
just
side.
supply side, it's demand side too.
Yeah, so I think that that's one that needs to be formally adopted, and it has to be, at least ideally it should be worked on in conjunction with our partners in San Juan, because I know that they are reliant on us for some of their growth plans and also their growth plans that have big effects for the valley. So,
And maybe someone could confirm this or correct me if I'm mistaken, but aren't we kind of waiting until the fall for our water study to be adopted at the state level once because I'm not sure where we're at with that, but I remember who was the
Mike.
Was it Mike?
Mark, oh. Mark Stilson?
Not Mike Duncan. I think it was Mark
Mark
Stilson.
Stilson.
He gave a presentation, right? And they were saying, well, formerly we thought we had a much higher yield, and now we think it's lower, but that hasn't been totally decided and
Monitor that.
hasn't been adopted or endorsed at the state level. And we're waiting. My impression is we're waiting for that, because that says we can only go up to 85% of safe yield. Don't quote me on these numbers. I'm not sure. I don't want to misinform. But to me, that is foundational, because every single thing that has come across us for recommendation, it's always been like the elephant in the room, where we're making some decisions because we're scared, rightfully so. But when we know those numbers, and if we are truly bumping up against it, then I think we can make more informed decisions, and we can have some confidence in doing it. Because right now we're like, well, maybe, or just flat out no, when maybe there's a lot more, that we could, build out. Not that I'm a proponent for that, but I think that's like my step one. Once we have that, I will feel more comfortable making it.
So Steve, is that the data side of things? Is that what you're getting at? Because without good data, it's really hard to make a good decision.
I want to say it's data, yeah.
And data is usually missing in a bunch of areas, right? And that's one which you think we would have a better idea of, especially water.
Right, in the desert.
So yeah, it's funny where the gaps exist, and that there is data gaps there. And Mark will be the one to tell you that too. The way the monitoring kind of program has been working and what they're trying to achieve does need attention. So what I've got is regional strategies are important to the commission, thinking in terms of our partners and how we engage them. And I'm speaking general plan wise. We're not trying to establish regulations or take over places or or do annexation strategies or anything, although some of that's on the books now. But land use scenarios are important, and how growth scenarios and preservation occur, growth management in those three kind of realms. A visionary approach. The people, each one probably should weigh in, the planning commission, on what their vision is, not now necessarily, but think about what that means in your reference to the Flagstaff and Josie's reference to the Sedona one. And there's lots of other models out there too. And then the data issues is the other one, is getting good background data as much as we can. And if we don't have it, start looking for it. A dashboard where people can actually come in and look at things and see what's there helps make decisions in a broader way with all our other partners. And need people that are coming in from outside.
I'm very curious and I know, John, you've alluded to this, so maybe you can speak to this. Looking at our gaps as well. One of those gaps, potential gaps, is economic, the ability for people who aren't currently in the economy to invest in our economy. That could be younger people, that could be people of different means. So that is one. What are we leaving off the table when it comes to economic diversification because of the lack of access? Housing is obviously a piece of that. As people leave our community, how many potential teachers, police officers, mentors, families are we losing? Like, what is our atrophy currently as a community because of our failure to invest in these areas? Not even just the real pain that's being felt by the people currently in the system. I'm very curious to know economic gaps as well when it comes to light manufacturing is one where we had several light manufacturers leave about 8 years ago because of lack of access to market, when it comes to a transportation plan. So I think that's, and again, I'm sorry, I keep coming up with these high level like trade-offs and gaps analysis, but I just feel like it is the lack of data, and it's the lack of visible data that to me is
Yeah, Emily, I'd add agriculture and food production to that list, because I've definitely heard from people in the past few years who have left Moab because it's easier to grow food elsewhere. And that's been a huge bummer to me. And it was in one of the either Flagstaff or Sedona where they really talked about identifying like complementary industries. So in thinking of economic diversification, thinking of what sort of, subgenres of economic modes sort of work hand in hand and make sense, and sort of proactively going after that. So I think that might be a little bit what you're getting at.
Mhm.
And Laura is an expert on local food production.
Not really.
But what are our economies of scale, and where is the competition? I think, Josie, you point to a very important question that I haven't heard answered or discussed much in that complementary economy. Rick, I want to make sure everyone had a chance to weigh in on sort of where we're at right now. So I just want to hit pause real quick. Obi, Rick, Garish, I don't know if you've joined or if you're still on the road.
Was he going to come
He was-
physically?
I think so. You may have hit traffic.
Well, I'm only going to say one thing. I think Steve summarized the water thing actually rather well in terms of roughly where we are. The thing is, I don't think we will have a water management plan for several, 2 or 3 more years. I was at a meeting with Mark Stilson on monitoring wells, because there's still some question. For instance, the city's putting in a well up by the golf course, and they want to see how it's going to be drawn down by pumping of other wells. But of course, the well isn't even in. Anyway, there's a lot of monitoring that probably still needs to be done. I think water's crucial, but I don't think we'll know for 2 or 3 years from the state. So it probably won't be in time for this kind of a plan.
Well, that's not a bad thing, though. I think in a lot of ways, we hopefully know the trajectory. And if it's 2 or 3 years, that's not a big horizon. But if we don't do anything, that 2 or 3 years could turn into 10 or 20 years. And so,
Agreed.
yeah, so that's good. The economies of scale one is a good reference point here too. The other one I want to mention as far as infrastructure is concerned and doing a level of service analysis is fiber and high-speed internet. We seem to be in kind of a shelter here around 5G, and I'm not sure what it is. It must be 3G or something like that. At least on Verizon it is. I know there's fiber in some areas, but there's fiber missing in a bunch of other areas too.
Our satellites are very clogged as well. Our cell phone, I was on a phone call with Verizon a month ago and they said they had never seen a network as clogged as ours. So that's, I mean, basically San Juan County is a dead zone. Anything south of the Shell is pretty much, you know, yeah, dead, which means if you don't have fiber, your access points are otherwise limited. So I just want to hit pause real quick. It's 2:54. If we go a bit over, that gives us about 45 minutes or so. John, looking at page 4 of the digital packet, page 2 of your staff report. So we had some exercises summarized. We're sort of being fast and loose with them, which is fine given the format. But I want to make sure that you have what you need coming out of this to empower your office. So
Okay, good. Thanks for keeping us on pace.
Facilitator
Yeah, I know it's time slips away. So there's a song about that. So if we go to this section, I wanted to run through this, and I'm going to do it very quickly. But it's almost like a checklist, and I want to see if there's any gaps that you see here. You don't have to tell, and you don't have to get all of them together at once. But I think this framework is very similar to what I'm used to. One of the big things that we'll click on next after this is a list of studies and plans. And I know the Planning Commission had some issues around some of that before. And then we have a list of, a larger list here of studies that are listed here. And maybe I'll scroll through to them. Which are, there's the study, there's the framework. And then what we did is, Laura did this, she actually took these out of the matrices. And some of these should resonate with you, with the commission. So I wanted to quickly run through some of those to see if they make sense. This is kind of an analysis of what we have and where we could go with things. And as we mentioned, we won't get to all of them, but here's the table of contents that is suggested. In order to get from where we are now to this, there's a couple of important things. The interviews are important. The feedback will be important from the Planning Commission. And then taking a look at what plans currently exist and taking those and putting them into the general plan. That's really what is normally done as we go through general planning exercise. And we have a lot of them. We have a resource management plan. Some of that's been updated in the general plan. We have a water study. We have a stormwater management plan. We have a transportation plan. All of those somewhat are fairly up to date. Some of them need work, but a lot of that can be imported. So one of the jobs we have internally here is to do that. It's not only to interview and discuss with everyone, but it's also to take those and then put them into the plan and have you look at it, have the Planning Commission look at it. So we're not there yet. Obviously, I've been here 6 weeks. We should have it done by now, right? I know that was the intention of Zachariah when he was here. And that's usually what happens. You always try to get these things started. HDA, the whole housing continuum, for example, is a big one. And by the way, and I should just break away and say this, Josie and I and Bob met along with Lisa, and we actually captured a lot of their comments. I've got them all on sticky notes here. We then met with Jenna and Ben and went through a list of the housing opportunities and challenges they see. We took a lot of Bob and Josie's comments and put them into a section. So we're going to have a workshop with the Housing ASU at their next regular meeting in August and run through the whole gamut, not just OAOs, but HDHOs, housing continuum, attainment, entry level, ownership, just kind of charting that territory. Getting some good data. This is one of the things that came up. Background data on what's there, what's available, how the HDHO process worked, what's out there for OAO. What does the occupancy rate look like for hotels? Is it anemic or is it vital? If it's at 65%, that's pretty anemic. And that's what somebody said. I don't know how true that is. And then what's our vacancy rate look like? I don't know what our residential vacancy rate looks like. Does anyone know? Is it below 2%, 1%? I mean, those are the kinds of things, if you don't make good decisions, if you have data, you're not going to make good decisions. So that housing thing is moving ahead, and that will be another element that really helps to reinform the general plan process, and we'll have gaps there. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's kind of, you take the things that are there, and whether they've been formally adopted is a question, but the Planning Commission has formally adopted them, and I don't know that, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure if you do.
I wasn't able to find record on many of them. I don't know if you were able to find any history there. what was formally adopted and when. I don't know where that would live.
Don't know where it is. And I left and.
So Moab and County, the water facts one, obviously. The water facts one is not a long-range document. Sanitary sewer master plan. I'm assuming that's been formally adopted. Spanish Valley Transportation Master Plan. I'm assuming that's been formally adopted by the commission. Sometimes these things aren't though. Sometimes they're just there. What else? We've got the Stormwater Master Plan. Has that been formally adopted? Yeah. Moab Area Affordable Housing Plan. The Stormwater Master Plan. There's another Stormwater Master. The Resource Management Plan. I don't know if that was offered by the state and it's just sitting there, or is one of those things that needs to be brought in. I'm guessing it has to be brought in. Water Distribution Storage Master Plan, the city of Moab. I mean, obviously that involves us because we share services. Moab Area Watershed Partnership. This is more of a decision-making area. That's the one that Mark was working on. Construction standards. I'm thinking. Yeah, I know we do need those, and that's pretty. Yeah. So Spanish Water Valley Water Conservation, profile of land use, non-motorized trails master plan. Laura, you should know that. Has that been adopted? You know, I know it's being used.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
kind of
it's-
loosely followed. It needs a read.
Yes, that was adopted. I dug it up the other day because I was looking at it for another reason. And it's been adopted, but it's old.
But
Yeah,
it's created some issues even in the last couple of years where there's a lack of understanding of its how it's meant to be applied in planning. And so we've had developments, large scale developments where there were proposed adopted trails running through it that then weren't reflected in the actual plat. And so it's,
Yeah.
I think it needs to be.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I was looking at.
Scenic
Yeah.
Byways Corridor Management Plan. That's a standard one in a lot of focused resort communities.
Oh, we have one of those. And it was adopted.
And John, I at least on the MOP plan, the Moab Area Watershed Partnership, it's a different group than any of the, county or city, et cetera. It usually has representatives from the county, the city, WISA, Forest Service, BLM, and a lot of NGOs on it, but those plans would have been adopted by the MOP itself.
Okay. So we need to check in with not just the planning commission, although you're important partners here, but we need to check to see, with administration, whether these have been formally adopted. I mean, that means something to some degree because it really, a formal adoption process is fundamental to putting something in a general plan. There's no point in working on something like this, putting it in a general plan, and finding out later, it wasn't even considered by a commission.
Right.
You're either you or the county commission. And I might be overstating that a bit, but it's one of those, one of the places I worked before, we had a downtown master plan, never adopted by the council. They didn't even recognize it. And that master plan existed. So, I mean, it gets weird sometimes, but the wilderness plan and the wilderness proposal map. I've added some other things on here, and I'm missing some, I know. I mean, I tried to capture this, and Laura's been gathering some of this as we've been going ahead. So if there's anything, now maybe not now, anything you see that's missing or was formally adopted, we'll actually check through this process anyway.
I was just asking Mary, a few years ago, there was a draft economic report anyway, that was quite comprehensive that looked at, housing affordability and.
Yeah, I've got
interesting.
those.
But I don't think it was, I only ever saw the draft. I don't think it was ever formally completed. And so there's an opportunity to just start with something, but I
Yeah.
think looking
Okay.
at that.
Elaine did send me, I've got 2 documents I haven't got on here.
Okay. And then we have our, while it's not comprehensive to the county holistically, our small area planning efforts at the 313, 191 included work on the resource, I always butcher what it's actually called, resource protection, scenic protection area, which,
That's not that one. That's not the Scenic Byways Corridor Management Plan.
no, it's not, or I don't think it is. No,
The
that's,
byways.
that's like
were actually
128.
128.
Yeah.
Those areas. And that one.
Was that a sector plan or is it like a local area?
it was a
plan?
local area plan, but the work that was included there was meant to allow that particular aspect of it to be repurposed across, as on principle across the county. So it was, here is the intent to protect the scenic resources of this area. And if we were to extend it, we'd have to define additional areas, but it was separate to.
Was that the only one like that?
That was our first time doing it that I'm aware of. I didn't know of any others that had been completed in the county. Right, and that was just completed this last fall. So, I mean, I would say it wasn't terribly comprehensive. It looked at a very small area, but it had aspects to it that could be repurposed elsewhere. So that's one I'd look at.
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, as far as areas are concerned, we'll get into this discussion a bit. I know everybody's always watching the clock here, so I want to go back here because I know there's an exercise there and kind of run through this checklist. This is what I consider more of a checklist. The beginning of it really is an overview of the role of the general plan, the purpose, the policy, strategic context. This is where we would, at the front end, we actually put the county strategic plan, as well as any community strategic objectives. That's where the public engagement part comes in. It's kind of a prelude to this area. So decision-making, sustainability, strategic planning, land use, transportation, infrastructure. These are the major checklists. Parks and Rec, environment, public safety. I don't know, are we missing anything here? I think one of the challenges is to get a really good implementation and indicator section that makes this work. So we're not leaving it on a shelf and we have all the departments, and it's difficult in the county sometimes, working together on these things with work plans.
This could ladder into environment or public safety, but we need to address noise pollution and air pollution outright, especially given some of the other conversations happening around economic diversity and some of the issues we've approached. I mean, this is one I hear come up over and over and over again. There was a report that was put out just in the last week on the health costs of noise. And I think it's something we need to address as a community. What is our approach to that? What are we willing to tolerate, and what do we think we must tolerate in order to get to our other goals?
Yeah, so that's somewhat unique for here.
It is unique, but I want to make sure that it doesn't get lost, because it's not just a flash in the pan. It's something that will continue to follow us and probably drive a lot of the things that make up our community.
Well, environment does house that. It may not be, you know, in this table of contents, that's where it would be, but that's good to flag those things. Air quality is always one that's on the table.
Right.
And actually noise is one of those ones that's definitely different here.
Yeah, well, and perhaps health, like public safety is there, but public health, I don't know if that should be, because that kind of applies to that as well. Those things such as noise pollution and other kinds of pollution. And I noticed health was a really at the top of a lot of things in some of those other strategic plans and general plans.
Josie, Steve just recommended public health and safety. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's great.
There's a new regime in the American Planning Association called an environmental impact analysis assessment. Have you seen that? And it's very holistic.
Mhm.
It deals not with just physical health, but the health of the community, those kinds of things too. It's actually much more holistic than a land use analysis.
People don't want to live here. It really doesn't matter what you do with economic diversity, right?
Yeah, I mean, if everyone's suffering, you're not going to be caring about the economy.
I want to just hit pause again, just to make sure everyone has an opportunity to weigh in on where we are so far. Rick, I want to make sure if you have anything you want to contribute, you have an opportunity to speak.
Yes, on.
We're all good?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, the health one, you flagged that. That's a good one. Noise is a good one to flag. Here's some masters and sector plans. And now I just took a stab at this. And, you know, the one you just mentioned could be I mean, I don't know where that would fit, but we need to, if there's discrete areas for sectors.
6.2.3, that's that. I mean, it's not the full corridor, but that's
Okay.
where we started.
The small area plan.
The small area plan, sort of up to the airport. It was the northern boundary up to the airport.
From where Giants is, or
Up to, yeah,
or
a little bit
Arches?
further north, but generally
Yeah.
up there on 191. Yeah, and then there was talk of doing one closer to Crescent Junction, but that could be nested into some of these others as well, like the Thompson one.
I mean, other than Spanish Valley and San Juan County, putting those kind of together, maybe they don't belong together, but you know, that's almost a discrete neighborhood in some ways, although we consider it walkable, but at least it's, I know people say, I'm from Spanish Valley. Or, I mean, part of this is important to public engagement because it's nurturing identity. And if maybe there's no identity, we're more of a linear kind of jurisdiction than anything. And we don't really, I know the city has more discrete neighborhoods, but I'm not sure, and that's not unusual for a county to have.
Well, we have the area where the university is going in, Mill Creek 191, which is going to be and already is distinct from the southern areas of Spanish Valley to the county line. So that's one distinction between here that I don't see. The Spanish Valley Drive as a whole is different from development along 191, and I wonder if it's worth viewing that, given its role as a secondary road and transportation, a sort of non-vehicular transportation route.
Like a multimodal kind of thing.
Yeah, like to sort of separate development on 191 is going to be very different than along Spanish Valley Drive, and I think the Spanish Valley as a whole is probably more separated into a few different areas. You have the sort of Murphy Lane area, you have Spanish Valley Drive and a few acres off of that, and then you have 191, which in of itself is sort of the southern 191, and then the area where Mill Creek hits it. And those are sort of the big four blocks, I'd say, on the southern end of the part of the county that's closest to the town. And then, of course, you have the remainder going over
We
to
should just sketch that up, maybe send that back.
Yes, I will do that.
Yeah, and this is really important because I think even though planning lines are fuzzy lines, not like engineering lines, identifying neighborhoods and identifying what groups are there is really important. You mentioned, Emily, the parks, so fringe area planning, I would call it fringe area planning around parks. We don't plan for them and they don't plan for us, but we seem to plan exclusively. We should be planning more inclusively around those. And the fringe areas around the parks, that would be another one that'd be interesting too. BLM land, and then the city in Castle Valley.
Mhm.
So those fringe areas are really focal areas too, as far as development is concerned. And most people think of annexation when you talk about fringe areas, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be mutual planning areas. And I don't know how well we coordinate that right now, to tell you the truth. The airport is somewhat discrete because it's off by itself, which is a good thing, because otherwise it gets crowded out.
Really quick on that, sorry, the county commission at the time we were adopting the plans to create the small area plan did specifically call out an interest in looking at the airport distinctly as a potential industrial zone versus looking at industrial development along, and even sort of high density commercial development along that entire 191 area. So potential for rail depot, the potential for additional sort of gas stations and things like that. That's wasn't specifically noted. My head's just not finding the categorization.
Well, so the industrial kind of things that link to transportation, so freight, airport, warehousing. Sometimes I don't know, because warehousing has to be small. It can't be that high. Otherwise, it'll interfere with the air. So that's one of those things. Large warehouses. It doesn't impact the ridge line. At least I don't think it does out there. So that view corridor. It's not the greatest entry into the city to have warehouses, but we're into the county, I guess, area. That's why I put gateways there. Usually gateways are an interesting reference as you come off the freeway, as you come down, as you come over the hill, what does that gateway look like? And those tends to be so amorphous. We don't focus enough on those kind of entry points and exit points too.
Well, and that's what we were starting to see is there's the Crescent Junction area, and that leads into this more industrial concentration that you currently have around the airport, and is that an area that we want to continue to concentrate around? And then that language of gateway was what was focused on that sort of 313 being the road mark for the northern boundary, but not the exact boundary. And so that plan, I mean, if you even read the intro of it, it's very much one of our goals is to create a gateway, a northern gateway into the community. There's an older plan as well that actually explicitly referenced the gateway development, but that one was replaced by the one we just adopted. But then that sort of shows you that triad of ascending development or different types of development along that northern corridor. So that's another one that can sort of be broken out.
Yeah, Thompson Springs, it needs a lot of attention, and it's really messed up from a land use code perspective and from a planning perspective. So there's one we can spend some time on. Cisco, I think Mary lumped Cisco together with Thompson Springs. Not sure Mary that mentioned that, Lisa, was that?
I can't remember.
I'm not sure if they fit together,
Oh,
but,
yeah.
but anyway, that's one of those other areas. So when we focus on sector plans, this is what the land use analysis will help take a look at, is where those concentrations are, what the infrastructure looks like, and drill down a bit deeper than just long range land use, start taking a look at development opportunities or restraint. So if there's anything that you can think of that flags in that area, mixed use is another one that we don't have as a really strong land use or code reference for that matter. So,
You want Castle Valley on that?
well,
Or
Yeah.
you mean Castle Valley in here? Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I excluded the jurisdictions,
Mm.
other
Oh, okay.
jurisdictions,
So-
but they
It's
can
still
be.
sort of a overlay.
Yeah,
But it is interesting, I mean, probably excluded for the same reason you don't see Moab there.
right.
It's got its own town government. Now, there is pieces of Castle Valley which aren't, there's an entire agricultural area in the Seventh-day Adventists on one side of the valley, which might or might not be of interest to us, but I understand why the town probably was excluded.
And who knows, as things start to expand in unforeseen ways and directions, it might be good to get ahead of that curve and call it, the Northern River Corridor or Eastern County River Corridor. Because there is some private land out there, and if it changes hands, I don't know what zoning is, probably all ranging grazing.
Well, for the next workshop,
Yeah.
we'll try to prescribe these a bit more and describe them in the area, what the flavors, the culture of them, and then bring that back for your that'll be our interpretation. You can look at that.
I
So
do,
for the
I do
artists
think,
among us, take a map and draw the boundaries you think
Yeah,
you
yeah.
see and submit it to John.
I do think actually the 128 corridor might be a very interesting one to have in there. It's another entrance, not as frequently used, but another entrance to town area.
Honestly, Bob, I almost wonder if that is the thing that should be grouped in with Cisco, given some of the more recent developments that have been proposed or adopted there. I mean, small scale, but that seems more in line with a collective use that,
Yep.
Cisco down to around the Castle Valley entrance area, and then Thompson being its own entity, deserving of its own attention.
Yeah, makes sense. It's very interesting. Cisco now has a little general store, and if they had more water, I think they'd develop.
Yeah. Great.
I know Green River's not on here either, and we bump up against Green River's on there, but it's the Green River area and the county land, there's a bit of an island out there, a county island.
That's an interesting one for me, given that county to county, we might not have as much overlapping interest necessarily, but the actual city of Green River, especially as it's increasingly being discussed, I don't know, acted upon, but discussed as a bedroom community for employees. And I know there's some very interesting development happening in the town of Green River at the moment, and very interesting sort of demographic changes. So I think it's absolutely worth seeing them as a partner we should be communicating with.
That's good.
Yeah, on that note, I don't know if Epicenter is on the radar as a nonprofit to be formally interviewing, because they work a lot of the economic development in Green River. And my other question is whether the I-70 corridor should be treated as kind of a whole entity in this section.
Yeah. Any specific area or just the whole freeway, Josie?
I mean, I'm kind of thinking, even though it's probably going to be, spotty as far as the actual land use goes, but to kind of think of it a little bit holistically, at least as far as it goes through Grand County, since it is kind of a continuous entity.
Especially the junction of highways, that one. Yeah. Okay. We need to call a pause.
Well, we've got 15 minutes left in our firm time agenda. We can see where everyone's at then, but what remains? If we did one more thing in this last 15 minutes, what do we need to get to as far as outcomes?
Okay, I just wanted to skim through some of these things
Okay.
and just let you know that a lot of these are being considered, which is typical land use strategies and development strategies. Parks and Recreation, we don't have a master plan, I don't believe. And it seems it's like in a cobbled together group, not that
Yeah.
Maddie's we got trails, you got a lot of groups involved with that type of thing. But a holistic look at Parks and Recreation, and that's really collaborative, obviously. That's one of those things you can usually collaborate regionally on. A lot of people will buy into that, whereas they won't buy into land uses usually. Transportation obviously is one, and the environment is one that they'll buy into as well. Floodplain's a big one. Contaminated lands, I'm not sure if, I know Umter's a big one, but old gas stations, old industrial areas, we don't have too many of those.
Junkyards, we've
Or
got some
junkyards. Those kinds of
Yeah.
things tend to be opportunities because usually have infrastructure around them. So, and usually you can get funding for those, for rehabilitation and remediation. Economic development, we kind of touched on some of that. That public safety element is kind of here. I think the health one, I thought I had health. Health is under culture.
I think public health and safety, personally, I
Yeah.
thought
Bump
that
it
was, I thought that was the right.
I
Designation.
like Josie's observation that those were high up on both Sedona and Flagstaff.
Mhm.
It's not that it's, the public safety one, by the way, is really pushing buttons for a lot of people. If you start talking about response time for fire departments and crime prevention for
Mm.
police departments and sheriff's departments in a county, those tend to be somewhat missed as far as general planning is concerned.
Does that include risk abatement for fire? Because I know that we
Yeah,
have,
so
yeah.
that's another one. So defensible space, so we call it, or that whole area. Emergency services and first responders, how is that working together? The health component, yeah, it wouldn't be a bad one to put that in as far as how's the health service working? What does that take a look at? There's a lot of good data that you can usually get on this because they gather a lot of data.
Mhm.
Yeah. Arts, culture, and tourism in the culture section too. I mean, that one, I think there's been a fair bit of focus in this collaboratively around that. There is a heritage section. There's actually a heritage standing committee, isn't there? I found out the other day. I think there's
What?
a heritage committee.
I didn't know it's a
There's like a
heritage.
historical
It's
Is that-
historical.
preservation.
Or for historical preservation, maybe is what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I'm going to beat this drum over and over and over again. Economic, gosh, I can't think of the right term. The ability for people in underrepresented groups in our current economy to enter into it. So, just economic access. Is that under economics? Is that under culture?
That's just in
Financial
culture.
mobility.
Yeah, or economic mobility is probably
Yeah.
right. But I feel as though we absolutely have to think about cultural heritage, cultural diversity is going to reflect the natural biases and systems that we exist within. And if we aren't thinking about that, it degrades our culture. So,
Okay,
I
that's
also wonder if this is a place to touch on like rural character or, I saw the term sense of place used a lot in either Flagstaff or Sedona, but really touching on like that small town character or that rural character and what that might mean for the plan.
Okay, that's good. This might be good to draw it. Right.
In the research management plan that you were talking about, one of the big deals they talked about was culture and custom. So you'll probably see that referred to a great deal in that plan.
Culture and
Culture and custom.
custom.
It wasn't something that I necessarily favored, but it was in there a lot.
Okay.
I think mainly to protect grazing activities. Many of these terms were, the state kind of mandated that we do a resource management plan.
There's a lot of state mandates that we have to take a good look at too, to make sure we cover them. That's one of them, of course. Finance is the other one that's really usually missed in a general plan as far as its impact and how it's measured and what those costs look like over time. And what's called a fiscal impact analysis. I don't know if it's been done here. It's taking a look at what the cost of development, where the focus is, and how various levels of development can be focused on for not only efficiencies, but also for long-term fiscal health. And almost every analysis that's been done will tell you that single-family detached never pays for itself. rural development never pays for itself. Rural sprawl never pays for itself. It's always subsidized by either mixed use and residential density or by commercial or industrial development. So we're living in a bit of a dream world if we think we're going to retire out someplace and then we're going to be looked after financially, because the fiscal impacts on municipalities is pretty severe if you don't think about balancing those things. And there's a good financial justification to actually kind of rationalize that, present that to not only the decision makers like yourselves, but also to the public. And a lot of people will not they'll still deny this is a fact.
How do we, or do we in this process, I should say, account for one issue that was raised when we were looking at the overnight accommodations overlay, which is so many of these large box, large scale developments are not locally owned, they're corporate owned. There are these global entities that don't invest into our community, drive the cost of living up, don't pay living wages, and ultimately lead to lack of competition of other smaller time entrepreneurs who are locally based. I mean, when I think about fiscal responsibility and also abetting the real costs that that sort of development has in a community, I think there's an opportunity to be creative there. So whether that's, scaled planning that is especially intended to focus on that grade of development, and if they ever want to expand or redevelop or whatever.
It's a tough one to
Trail
get
that
at.
with an ellipses.
So to tag on to that is just kind of an anecdote. I have some friends that have been business owners in Sedona, and I called them and got their perspective after seeing that was one of our example towns. And it was interesting to see their perspective was, a lot of these, the regulation the idea of the plan was well intended, but what they saw with increased regulation on things is it really just meant that kind of nudged the little guy out because they were prevented from having that sign there, whatever it was. And so they got pushed out, and then it kind of caters to deeper pockets, and that being corporations. And
Great.
I mean, what we see here, and I
A
think,
gentrification kind of thing, almost.
but like a government assisted, with good intention, but the consequence was,
It's one of those high-end locations where design standards are almost the ultimate.
and that's another key example. And I think there might be times we're doing that. So I think I just throw that out as a word of caution that there's a lot of great intention, but the consequence is oftentimes the opposite.
The burden of scale is the issue in every industry that we're dealing with. I mean, from density to agricultural use to agricultural, changing from agriculture to other use. If you do things on a grand scale, only the people with the biggest scale are going to be able to stay afloat with it. So, no, I think that's absolutely.
It's interesting here that somebody said that franchises have a hard time making a go of it here. Burger King comes in town and goes broke. That's not very often. McDonald's is here and Subway is here. You've got some franchises. You got a lot of mom and pop shops, I think.
Well, and to be clear, I'm not specifically talking about franchises. I'm talking about the, however many acres that more recent development, which is in the city, but it's still representative of the scale of the impact of some of these brands. I mean, if you took the top 5 hoteliers and you looked at how many rooms they host here versus how many rooms are hosted by smaller entities, my guess is it's probably about a 50-50 split, but it's 5 to 50. And so, that has huge impacts on our ability to stay afloat, to stay competitive, to stay wage competitive, to offer benefits that offset it. And then, of course, the cost of housing that those larger developments have is huge. So, and housing being comprehensive of all sort of economic costs. Anyway,
Okay, so
I'm being my own worst enemy and using time that we can use
Yeah.
differently.
we have a whole schedule of maps and everything that we need to do a fair bit of update on and trying to get these things integrated more. So we should start layering these things in a good GIS fashion. So there's a fair bit of visual that's involved. And another big part of this obviously is implementation. And the kinds of reporting on a regular basis that we should be doing corporately, both to decision makers, the planning commission, and with the county commission, and to stakeholders. So one of the goals that I've always shot for is to get a dashboard going that actually starts to represent the cross community interests. And there's lots of good models out there. So I've started to get a hold of the Utah Community Foundation, which tends to be one of the anchor areas, community foundations for data, and getting that information out there because they tap into a lot of funding people that want to know what the results are. So I've talked to Utah out of Salt Lake City just to see whether they've seen the models that are in other parts of the country. So I've just explored that part. There might be other avenues for getting data and for sponsoring these things. It's good to get a university involved. We do have a university person. This is one of the questions we're going to ask the commission. There's probably a couple people at the university as far as decision making is concerned we should interview. And Laura, I don't know if you grabbed somebody. I know you were asking that question this morning. So if there's anyone else that we could think of that needs to be involved at the university, that'll be helpful. 'Cause we
Yeah, I
wanna
just
keep that
found a
open.
contact, but I don't know.
That's one that.
Well, we're meeting with her. She's the like Moab USU extension.
Oh,
person,
she,
but,
okay.
I don't know if she has anything about data
But
or
that,
anything.
that'll help. I know there was somebody on a Zoom meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago that was there, and I thought it was a HASU meeting, but we want to tap into that resource as well, because that ongoing research in a number of different areas, not just indicators, is so important. And I know they're doing research in a bunch of areas as well. So it'll be important for them to feed us, and hopefully we'll get some things that we can tap into there. So, and just to kind of capture this in the last 30 seconds, Emily. We've got a lot of comments. We'll summarize these here too, and Laura's got some as well. We went through them studies and plans. We took a look at that. We looked at the table of contents. We haven't done the land use code checklist, but we're looking for any comments that you might have, and either individually or corporately. We took the public engagement strategy we talked about, and although we didn't really break these off into pieces, but that'll be an important part of this as we start moving forward and thinking of how we could facilitate and engage people on a number of different levels. It is difficult in a lot of cases to get people to come to long-range planning meetings and think in terms. I have ways of doing that in the past, that we've had over 700 people that we actually had at different sessions. And then just going out and starting a phase. I think if you start putting planning charrette together with a number of different tables, and kind of almost a 3-ring circus thing going on, so people there'll be some interest there. And you'll have really engaging activities with their stakeholders. That's the goal, is to have that as a real kind of watershed moment for the public. And then if we could springboard into a general plan that's basically completely updated, with lots of gaps in it that we can look at in October, that's the main goal. And then to go back and start redrafting the whole community engagement part of it and looking at the various sections.
Well, one of the blessings of this year is everyone got really familiar with remote communications. So I'm sure we will have participation like we haven't seen before. Great. Well, just to sort of put a pin in this. So we are going to come back at 4 o'clock for our regular meeting. I'm planning on sticking around. I don't know if you are. We're going to try this remote hybrid thing. Yes, no, should we make a decision right now?
I have to go home. I have to be with my kids, so I'm gonna Zoom from home.
All right. Are we doing Zoom?
You're going home?
That's the question.
I'm easy.
All right, we'll stay here. We'll figure it out. So if anyone would like to come join us, you're welcome. So we'll do that at 4. We want to hold another workshop in August, so we'll talk dates at our regular meeting at 4 o'clock. If there are any remaining comments or questions from the Planning Commission, we can pick that up during the staff report as well during our regular meeting, just to make sure we're putting a close on it. And now take 30 minutes, grab a snack, and see you all in just a bit.
We have juice boxes.
We
Come
have
on
juice
down.
boxes
Come on
and
down.
cookies.
And that's from the Moonflower too. So they're healthy.
They're healthy.
They got a stamp of health on them.
All right, perfect. Okay.
So you gotta stop.
Stop it. Stop it all.
No, we're still live on YouTube.
We want to end that, all right?
Just hit end on Zoom.
Yeah, just end Zoom.
Did you say your name, Elissa or